sorted. Okay. All right, everybody. I'm going to now share screen and put you on the usual time base. There we go. Okay, we're about to begin a new mimer. I'm in Parshas Pinchas, and one of the Inyan in Parshas Pinchas, obviously, is the Inyan of Rosh Chodesh. That's what we start off with over here. We start off with the concept of Rosh Chodesh. Need a cipher this one here. Cipher here. Parshas Pinchas. Good join. Okay. Okay. So the parsha begins with the words from the parsha. I mean, the Maimon begins with the words from the parsha. Rosh Chodesh, Akribu Oila Hashem. On Rosh Chodesh, on Rosh Chodesh in the plural dafka, Takribu, you should offer Oila, Korban Oila to Hashem. And the Zohar has some difficulty with this pasuk, as he's about to explain, and he says as follows: Ve'isa Zohar. It says in the Zohar, Kama Roshin Inun. How many heads are there l'sihara to the moon? Because it says Baroshei in the plural, Baroshei Chodesh. Now, obviously, the simple, straightforward meaning is every Rosh Chodesh, but could have said it somewhat differently. Could have even said Barosh Chodeshechem, in the beginning of your months. The months has to be in the plural, but not the Roshei. No, it shouldn't be in the plural. There are some who want to mutarate that this shows you that sometimes there's going to be 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. There's going to be 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. However, that's only rabbinical. That's not the Raisa, so it doesn't really fit into the pasuk too well. In any event, that's the Zohar's question. Zohar asks, "Kama Roshin inu l'sihara? How many heads are there to the moon? Right? How many beginnings are there of the moon?" It would seem that there's one. In fact, there's one moment at which Rosh Chodesh begins, and if you have a look on the Luach, you'll see that the Rosh Chodesh is in an exact point in time, ad kedei kach, that it's divided not only into hours and minutes, but even halokim, which is parts of minutes, and in other words, seconds. So we know exactly when the Rosh Chodesh is going to be, and it's all calculated. So why then does it say Rosh Chodesh? And the Zohar goes on to deepen the question. The only beginning of the moon, in other words, the only beginning of Rosh Chodesh, which is governed by the appearance of the new moon, the beginning is really from the sun. It's the shimsha, the shimsha being the sun. So obviously these 2 things are an inyan in ruchnius. There's the inyan of sihara, which is, as we'll find out soon enough, malchus, and there's the inyan of shimsha, which is the inyan of zer anpin. Yeah, malchus is the final of the 10 sfirot. Zer anpin is the cluster of sfirot from chesed to yesod. Those 6 spheres from the chesed to yesod. All right, so anyway, it says like this, that the sun is the Reisha, as we'll see, the Ihu Reisha Lagaba. That is the Reisha of it. The Reisha, in other words, of the moon. The Reisha, the beginning of the moon, the beginning of the new moon is from the sun. Ukanoida, and as we well know, the Sierra, Kanoida, as we know, the Sierra, the moon, again, is all in Aramaic, in Zohar, Zohar. The Sierra, he beginneth Malchus. V'amshocha b'Malchus, he mishemesh Havaya beginneth Zo. So, Shemesh U'Mogein, there's a passage that says Shemesh U'Mogein Havaya Elokim. Right? Shemesh U'Mogein Havaya Elokim. The sun and the sheath around the sun corresponds to the name Havaya and the name Elokim. Shemesh U'Mogein Havaya Elokim. So here we see that the Shemesh corresponds to Shem Havaya, which ultimately is the aspect of Zer Anpin. Why? Because the main sphere of Zer Anpin is Tiferes. That's the central sphere of Zer Anpin. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Tiferes is the main sphere, and the unique thing about Tiferes is that the Oyer and the Kli are the same name. Let me just explain. each of the spheroids has an inyan of or and an inyan of kli. Now, for each of the spheroids, there's the oir is always the same oir. There's the oir of Shem Havaya, but the kli is a different kli for each sphere. The ikar, we're talking about the Sheva Shemois She'enon Limchakim, the 7 names that one may not erase, 7 names you may not erase. Those names are Shem Kel B'Chesed, right? The name Kel is in Chesed. Shem Elokim B'Gvura. Shem Havaya B'Tiferes, right? Shem Havaya B'Tiferes. And when we say Shem Havaya, we mean the Kli is Tiferes. The Kli of Tiferes is also Shem Havaya. So the Oir and the Kli, and that's what's unique about Tiferes, the Oir and the Kli about Shem Havaya. Yeah, good. Okay, so now, then let's just finish it off so we get it clear. Netzach, which is after Tiferes, is Havaya Tzvakois, right? And Hoid is Elokim Tzvakois. Yesoid is Shin Daled Yud, and Malchus is Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Yeah, Shaddai is Yesoid. You know, we don't say it, we should say Shakai, whatever, but and Aleph Daled Nun Yud, Adnai is Malchus. Now there are Shemus as well that go for Chochmah Bina, and I feel for Keser as well, and even Das. These are all brought in Kavonas Rizal and so on. Chochmah is Bederek Klal Yud K, right? Yud K, just Yud K, and Bina is Yud K Vav K, but with the Nikud of Elokim, the Nikud of Elokim. In some Sforim it says that the Shem associated with Bina is Eloka, right? Aleph Lamed Vav Hey, Eloka. But Derek Klal Rizal says that Shem Elokim is brought to Chassidus also. The oasis of Shem Havai was a Nikud of Shem Elokim. That's Bina. Das would be Aleph Vav, not Aleph. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, Aleph Vav. Hey, Aleph Hey Vav K. Sorry, Aleph Hey Vav K would be the Kli of Das would be Aleph K Vav K, and Keser Aleph K Yud K Ekir. Right, okay. So just to finish those off, but in any event, the main sphere of Zeranpin is Tiferes. And the unique thing about Tiferes is the order of Tiferes and the Kli of Tiferes Baal Shem Havai. That's what he says over here. Bechina Shemesh is the Inyan HaShemesh Havai Bechina Zochu. V'imkai. So therefore, the Zohar wants to ask the question: Mahu Inyan Roshei Chodoshim. Roshei. Why does it say Roshei in the plural Loshen Rabbi? Why does it say Roshei Chodsheichim? It should say Rosh Chodsheichim, because it's one Inyan. It's an Inyan of Naim Havaya and then of Shem Havaya. Ela Roshei, but it says Roshei because there are two. There are two Inyanim. Ela Roshei train. Wherever it says Roshei in the plural, there's two Inyanim. B'chol Yarch v'Yarcha, the Inun Yaakov v'Yosef. In every month, there are two aspects to the month. Therefore, it's called Roshei. There are two heads to the month. Who are the heads? Yaakov and Yosef. Where do they come in from? Okay. Yaakov corresponds to Tiferes, and Yosef corresponds to Yesoid. And we'll see that this is called Tzadik Elyon and Tzadik Tachton, and we're going to get to this whole. He's going to explain it all. Don't worry about it. But this is what this is what the Zohar says. Pirush Hamikdash Melech. The Mikdash Melech is a pirush on the Zohar, one of the most well used pirushim on the Zohar in Chassidus anyway. Chassidus often brings down the Mikdash Melech. He's very accurate in his pirushim and so on. In any event, I think the Mikdash Melech was someone named Shalom Buzadlo, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was his name. Sfardi Kubal, but a great Bakubal, and someone who was he was very close to the Inyonim of Chassidus. He understood like the same kind of derek of that Chassidus has. So he's brought down quite a lot to Mikdash Melech. Pirush Mikdash Melech, the Yaakov Yosef, to Bechinas Tiferes v'Yesoid.
It's from like later.
After that reason. Yeah, after that reason. He was a Talmud of he was either a Talmud of the Arizal or a Talmud of the Talmud of the Arizal. so it's not 100% sure. In any event, Tiferes and Yesod. That's what Yaakov and Yosef are Tiferes and Yesod. Look, and a move on. Don't understand this. Alo hamshocha mitiferes ugamken al yidei Yesod. Isn't the hamshocha from Tiferes to Malchus not directly from Tiferes, but it's only al yidei, it's derech Yesod. It's via Yesod. Because any hashpah to Malchus always comes through Yesod. It doesn't come through Tiferes directly, at least l'choira. Okay, so we'll see. As we know from the psukim, from Josh's Chassidus and Kabbalah, shekol hamshochas hein miyasoid. That all hamshocha from a higher partzuf come to a lower partzuf comes via yesod of that particular partzuf. Now we're talking about Zeranpin. Zeranpin is a partzuf, a cluster of sfirot or a sphere that has a number of different relationships called a partzuf. We have to understand the difference between a sphere and a partzuf. A sphere is one particular koyach. A partzuf is a cluster of koyches. Let me just give you an example. Bina is a partzuf on its own. Bina is a partzuf. Chochmah is a partzuf. Zeranpin is a partzuf. Malchus is a partzuf. Right? And there's other partzuf as well. But in any event, Zatik Yoimin, Marichanpin, all partzuf. But in any event, the explanation that we have to understand here is that Bina could be understood in various different ways. Bina could be understood as the Reya, or if you want to put it in Grober Loshen, the wife, so to speak, of Chochmah, right? It's that train rain, the Lomis Parish in the Zohar says about Chochmah Bina, two spheroids, two partzufim that never separate one from the other. So on the one hand, Bina's got the relationship to Chochmah. On the other hand, Bina also has a relationship to Keser, because Bina is makabel not only from Chochmah, but Bina is actually mishtalshel from Keser. The Indian of Tainug, in other words, Pnimius Keser, is actually nimshach into Bina more than into Chochmah, right? More than into Chochmah.
Wow.
In any event, Bina is also Aim Habonim. She's the mother of the children, in other words, of Zeranpin and Malchus. So Bina has a number of different. She's a makabel from Chochmah and from Keser. She's a wife, so to speak, of Chochmah, an equal partner, right? She's also the mother of Zeranpin. So she has a number of different. She wears a number of different hats. That's what a partzuf is. A partzuf doesn't wear one hat; it wears a few hats. Several hats.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, of course.
How is Bina makabel from Keser? I mean, if it's not
Bina is not mishtalshel from Chochmah. Bina doesn't come from Chochmah. It's related to Chochmah and it gets koyach from Chochmah, but it's mishtalshel actually from Keser, right? Okay. So in any event, this is so our question therefore is, since we're talking about the hashpah from one partzuf to another, from the partzuf of Zer Anpin to the partzuf of Malchus, or Nukva as it's called, if you're talking about a partzuf, it's called Nukva. If you're talking about a sphere, it's called Malchus. If you're talking about the partzuf of Nukva and Zer Anpin, how Zer Anpin mashpia on Nukva via Yesod, right? That's the Yesod, and that's the whole concept of Zivug, and that's the whole concept of Yichudim that we all, and in Kavonas, that's what we're always trying to do, is channel things through Yesod into Malchus, right? That's called the Yichud and the Zivug and so on, so forth, of Zeranpin and Nukva. In any event, Imkain, Ma Mechashev Yesod L'Rosh B'fnei Atzmai. Why are we regarding Yesod as a Rosh? L'chayra, the Rosh is
Zeranpin.
Tiferes of Zeranpin, right? Because that's the Ikra of Zeranpin. That should be the Rosh. Why we consider it? It's only a channel. It's a funnel. Why are we considering it a Rosh? Right? It's not a Rosh. In fact, it's the Sof. It's the Sof. It's not the Rosh. So why are we considering it a Rosh? A Rosh B'fnei Atzmo on its own. V'nishara hakushia. And therefore, the question that the Zohar asks remains. Nishara hakushia. Nishara, he says, okay. Nishara hakushia. In modern Hebrew, I think it would be nishara hakushia, but it doesn't matter. But chikama rishoin inu l'sihara, and therefore the question remains: how many heads are there for the moon? ולהבין זה, יש להקדים תחילה, in order to be able to understand this, we have to preface what it says in the previous mimer, in the previous mimer, the ha'oiros, the Atzilus, that the lights of Olam Atzilus, harahem b'bechinas hislapshus pnimi, b'bechinas kelim da Atzilus. They're in a state of hislapshus in the kelim of Atzilus. Now, we did discuss this before, but this is an extremely important inyan, which is not really well explained in most places. It's not well explained. The Rebbe Rashab is going to explain it to us now, but he doesn't bring the whole picture together. There is actually one sefer that explains it very, very well. There's a few places where it explains it. The best place that it's explained actually is in a mimer called Mimer Hashifrus Hasimcha from Rav Yitzhak Isaac Mihomo. Mimer Hashifrus Hasimcha, which I don't think is a print anymore, but you can get it online. It's just free online. Mimer Hashifrus Hasimcha. So now, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Mihomo wasn't just a chassid. He was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and Tzemach Tzedek. And after the passing of the Mittler Rebbe, the Chassidim went to Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Mihomo, and they wanted him to be the Rebbe, right? So he wasn't just a stump person. He was a koyach, right? He wanted it, so he agreed. And then he went to sleep that night, and he had a dream. And the Alter Rebbe came to him and said to him, "You shouldn't be the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek should be the Rebbe." And immediately he went to the Tzemach Tzedek and he said, "You're my Rebbe, you're my Rebbe." And in other words, he took the Nesias of the Tzemach Tzedek very seriously, and he became a great chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. In any event, he writes in his Maimah Shifrus Simcha that there's three inyonim. There's three stages of development, you could say. Right? The first stage of development is called ishtalshelus. What's ishtalshelus? From the word shalsheles, a chain, where one link is connected to the next, but it's sort of linear, like linear development, you could say. Right?
Cause and effect.
Cause and effect, exactly. That's exactly right. Ila va'alu, that's exactly what he says. Right? Ila va'alu, cause and effect. And so that's ishtalshelus. Then there's an inyan called hislapshus, which is what he's about to explain now. What's hislapshus? Hislapshus is not linear. Hislapshus is three-dimensional, right? Hislapshus is when one inyan becomes clothed in the other, so that the clothed part, the kli, is led by what's clothed in it. In other words, the higher partsufim coming to hislapshus. Spheroids are in a state of hishtalshelus, right? But partsufim come into hislapshus. So he's going to explain the hislapshus of the concept of hislapshus now. But then there's a third inyan, which is really not explained anywhere but in the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and the Talmid HaBaal Shem Tov. In other words, you find it in Kumarna to a certain extent, and you find it in Chabad, particularly in Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac Mihomo, who spends a few pages explaining about the third inyan. What's the third inyan? It's called Hashra'a, right? Hashra'a. So if the inyan of hislapshus is one partsuf in another, the inyan of Hashra'a is the inyan of the Or Makif or the Or HaSoivev, which is shoire on something like the Shechina was shoire on the Aroy, but it was not malubash in the Aroy, right? The Shechina was shoire on the Aroy, not malubash. The Shechina was the cloud was shoire on the Mishkan, but it wasn't malubash on the Mishkan.
It was not.
No.
It was
the
not.
Inyan of the Ruach of Moshe, va'atzalti min Ruach asher alecha, va'asim al aleihem, and I will put it upon them. The Shivim Zakanim, that was in last week's parsha in Parshas Ba'aloischa, and the Ruach Moshe was sure upon them, but it wasn't melubash in them, right? Okay. And there's a number of other different inyonim that have to do with Hashra, but Hashra means even in hislapshus there has to be some kind of tzimtzum. In ishtalshelus there's a major tzimtzum. In hislapshus there's also tzimtzum, but to a lesser degree. But there has to be some kind of tzimtzum, because the kli that it becomes melubash in is metamtzem the or that's melubash in the kli, right? With Hashra there's no tzimtzum. It's not metumtzam. There's no Indian of Tzimtzum, and that's why it's shy to the Indian of Shekhinah.
Kli has to meet Samsum, or the or has to meet Samsum?
The or mitzamtem to go into the Kli.
To the Kli,
Yeah, the
right,
Kli is
right.
mitzamtem the or. Yeah, the or is mitzamtem, and the Kli is mitzamtem the or. The Kli causes the Tzimtzum in the or itself becomes yeah, it's just different way. Yeah, okay, good. So.
Can you explain the hashro again? You're saying that there's no tzimtzum in hashro?
Yeah, there's no tzimtzum in hashro. It's the etzem thing that it is shoyre on whatever it might happen to be. So there's the regular inyan of tzimtzum, where tzimtzum means helam and hester and mute, doesn't happen with hashro. That's why it's called hashro. It's a shechina, and it's shaykh to the or hasoiviv kol, not to or hapnimi. So or hasoiviv is shoyre. Right, that's a short. Okay, let's continue.
In the slapshus, you said three-dimensional interaction.
Yeah, why? Because the slapshus has to do with the interaction between two partzufim, and it's like it's three-dimensional in the sense it's not linear, but it's not linear. It's three-dimensional. It's the how do you explain three-dimensional? Because it happens in a number of different ways. It's not only cause and effect, but it's an interaction. In other words, just like Zeir Anpin affects Malchus, Malchus affects Zeir Anpin. There's like there's a yichud. They become one thing. They become one entity, but each gives their own inyan to the yichud, and that's what the inyan of Islam is. Okay, let's go a little bit further. So again, let me just repeat that line. The oyes da atzilus harem bechinas islapshus pnimi. The beginners are Kalim Zatzilus, the or Vatzilus Melubash, the Pnimius in the Kalim Vatzilus, it's or Pnimi, but not or Makif. Sha'al Daizen, Nasim Bechinas Mahus, Metzias Davar, Bechinas Oyer, HaChochma, Oyer HaChesed. That's how it becomes the or of Chochma and the or of Chesed. Why? Because the Kli of Chochma is Makabal the or of Chochma, and therefore it becomes a Mahus of Chochma. This is now the sphere of Chochma. The or and the kli of chokhmah is the sphere of chokhmah. The or and kli of chesed is the sphere of chesed. Right? The or of chesed melubash in the kli of chesed, and so on and so forth. Okay. Why is this? V'sivas adabarhu, and the reason for it is as follows: Mipnei sha'oris gamber shosham makoira, Moshe including boring sof lifnei hatzimtzum arehem bebechinas eses spherois. How is it possible that the or, which is l'choira an inyan makif, how could it be melubash in a kli which is matumtzam? And the answer is because, as we've been explaining all along, there's a medida in the or before it comes into the kli. There's there are limitations. There's already a how do you say medida? There's a measuring out of the or before it actually goes into the kli. As we've been saying all along, this is called the Esesphiros Aknuzois. As they are in the Or Ein Sof, there's already Esesphiros Aknuzois. As they are in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, right? What does the Tzimtzum do? The Tzimtzum separates them into, in the Or Ein Sof, they're all one thing, even though they're called Esesphiros Aknuzois, but they're not recognizable individually. Then comes the Tzimtzum, and they become individual spheroids. They're still in the individual spheroids, which are called the spheroids blima. Before they're called the Esesphiros Aknuzois, the hidden spheroids. Now they're revealed spheroids, but they're revealed in a way that you can't define them. The Esesphiros blima, right? Called the Esesphiros blima. And then when they become a lubash and atzilus, they're called the Esesphiros. Then it's called stam spheroids, right? That's called the Esesphiros. So that's what he's talking about now. B'shorsh and Mekoyran, Moshe including B'or Ein Sof now. Tzimtzum the Esesphiros like Benuzos Harehem B'chinos Esesphiros. Behind let me just get my marker on the place here. Oh, so, junk. Sorry. All right. Behind She'ein Zeh Ha'or Sheb'chinos Ein Sof. It's not the Or Ein Sof itself. Mashu Or Ein Sof. Ki'im Masha Or Ein Sof. Shir ba'atzmoi lahoyer b'chinas midu ugvul. In other words, in the Ein Sof there was already a hashora, there was a measuring out of the or before it was actually physically measured out, so to speak, before it became mugbal, before it became limited. Okay, Shiva asked him, he measured out himself in the or himself what would be in the future. It's ki'ilu, if you want to put it in this way, it's ki'ilu, it's in thought rather than in speech. The creation was created in speech, right? But everything was prior to that in thought. I'll give you an example of this. It says, Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos, the world was created with 10 utterances, right? So the question is asked, wait a second, if you count up, there's only 9. Or is the first one, and then Tacharis Desha, and so on and so forth, Yirakia, Tacharis Desha, Bahamas, Adam, and so on. That's it. You have a look, there's only 9. So Chazal explained, Bereshis Nami Manahu. The word Bereshis is also a Maimon. Only what? It's a Maimon on a different Madrega, right? The other ones are preceded by Vayomer Elokim. Bereshis is not preceded by Vayomer Elokim because there's no Vayomer. Vayomer means it's a Hizgalus, it's revealed, it's spoken out, so to speak, right? Masha Einkaim Bereshis is in Machshava. It remains in Machshava. So that kind of inyan is that like the Esesri is like Nuzos. It's already in Machshava what's going to be because everything is contained in the word Bereshis. It's all there in the word Bereshis. And
It's like a skira. It's like one look, like one.
Yeah, skirachas. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. And interestingly enough, just Derech Agav, this has got nothing to do with what we're learning, but when it says that Moshe Rabbeinu, when they made the menorah, it was called Miksha Achas, right? It was made of Miksha. So Rashi brings it down that Niskasha Moshe from the word Miksha, that Moshe Rabbeinu had a kushya. He didn't understand the menorah, how to make the menorah. And one of the pirushim that's broad, beautiful pirush, is that the reason he didn't understand it because all the inyonim in Beis Hamikdash correspond to something in Ma'aseh Bereshis. When Batallah created the Mikdash, the Mishkan, he used the oasis of Ma'aseh Bereshis. What was the kli that corresponded, or the inyan in the Mikdash that corresponded to the word Bereshis, because it's also one of the Maimonas, the menorah. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand it. It was B'chinas Machshava, right? Anyway, right, that's just that's the Derech Agav from last week's parsha. But okay, let's continue. So Masha Oren Sof Shir Ba'atzboy Lahoy V'Chiz Milu V'Chulu V'Agam T'Kamo Shehem Klulim B'Oren Sof Baruchu, and even as they are kalul, they're included in the Oren Sof. Harhem V'Chiz Pshitus Lagamre, they're in a state of complete Pshitus. In other words, you won't be able to recognize them all one thing. Pshitus lagamresh and B'chinas mitzius mitzios nikaros chulu. They're not recognizable mitzios. Mikoma koma hem b'chinas esespheros. Nevertheless, they're called esespheros. B'kashe nimshachu, when they are nimshach, when they're brought down, when they're elicited, I suppose you could say, al dehatimtum, through the timtum b'chinas spheros pratios, as individual spheroids, there they become Metzius Nikeres. And where do they become Metzius Nikeres? In the Kav. Even though still at that point in time, they called Esespheros Blima, and not yet called Esespheros as the Orius and Kalim. That's first in Olam Atzilus. Okay? Or Kamo Hakav, She'asrim and Nekudois, like a line that is made from points. And that's exactly the way a line is made up of individual points, right? And that is the way the spheroids, blima, are, like the line, there's a kav. Yeah, the kav, the line of light that came out of after the tzimtzum. And therefore they're in a state that could be clothed within the kalim, etc. But all day, and through being clothed in the kalim, the oires become according to the mahus of the kalim. They become a zach, they become a thing, they become something. In other words, the oir in the kli of Atzilus is already a sphera, which has a geder. We can define it, we can explain it, we can differentiate it from other spheres and so on and so forth. Or a chokmah, or a chesed, etc. Okay, that's all what we learned previously. So So now we got to go back. Now we got to start with the new Indian. Okay. This is also the reason for the division between upper and lower, higher and lower in the Esesphiros, in the Esesphiros of Atzilus. Shara Esesphiros da Atzilus and Bechinis Maila, because the Esesphiros of Atzilus are called they have the concept of higher spheres and lower spheres. Shachokma hu lamaila, b'madrega me'abina, v'hamoichin lamala me'amidos. The moichin transcend the midos. Chabad transcends the chagas and so on and so forth. Ada Malchus, until you get to Malchus, she is softness, Seifert called Dargin the Atzilus, the end of the line of Atzilus, the end of the last Madrega of Atzilus, Nikres Mata, and that's called for sure the lower, right? So you have upper and lower, which you didn't have before. In the Orient Sof, you didn't have the union of upper and lower, you didn't have the union of, even in the Kav had a beginning and an end, but it didn't really have upper and lower in the same sense, right? You didn't have upper and lower. The Orient Sof, so lower yesh in Malumata. Then in the Orient Sof, you don't have higher and lower, upper and lower. As it says in Eitz Chaim, right at the beginning of Eitz Chaim, before the Ne'etzolim, before the world of Atzilus was emanated, Ne'etzolim, Ne'etzlu, Ne'etzlu, Ne'etzolim, it was one simple, undifferentiated light. The word Pashut doesn't mean simple, really. It means undifferentiated. It's not possible to differentiate in Madregas. It doesn't have malumata, rosh sof, etc. Doesn't have those in yonim, beginning, end, malamata, and so on. Whereas Spheroids, yes, is chalkus malumata. But when you talk about Spheroids, then you have higher and lower, yeah, and rosh sof. And the reason for that is because of the whole concept of Islapshus Pnimi, right? The Islapshus Pnimi, Oiros Bakeli. That's what Islapshus means. It means Oiros and Keli. According to the Kli, so will be the Or that is Meir in that Kli. In other words, a Kli of a certain dimension is not going to be able to, in general, is not going to be able to accept another kind of Or, unless there's a thing called Achlifu Duchtaihu, which is a concept that's brought in Chassidus from the Zayar, when the Or swaps its nature with a Kli, right? In other words, you sometimes have the Or of Chesed going to Gvura, or the Or of Gvura going to Chesed. You can have that, but it's unusual. The reason that it happens is because there's a Gilui Elyoin, there's a higher Gilui that causes that to happen. And the reason that it can happen is because, unlike the world of Tohu, in the world of Tohu that could not happen. Only in the world of Tikkun it can happen. And why? Because there's hiskalulus of the Oirs. In other words, in the Or of Chesed, in the Kli of Chesed, you have Chesed Gvuri Tiferes Netzach Hod Yesod. In fact, you have Chochma Bina, Kesach Chochma Bina, Chesed Gvuri Tiferes in the Or of Chesed. And you have the same thing in the Or of Gvura, right? Kesach Chochma Bina, Chesed Gvura Tiferes, and so on and so forth. In the Or, and therefore, you can sometimes have one thing swapping into its opposite Kli, because what is Misgala is the Gvura in the Or of Chesed can now go into the Kli of Gvura and be Misgala as an Or of Chesed in the Kli of Gvura. That's called Achlifu Duchtayu, where they swap it place. Okay, but that's an unusual thing. In general, it is that the Kli is going to Magale, the Or, going to reveal the Or that is Shaykh to that particular
Why is it an unusual thing? Isn't it supposed? Seems like it should be like a constant thing. And it, no.
Why is it unusual? It's unusual because that concept of Achlifu Duchtayu is unusual because it requires the Gilu of an Or Elyon. In other words, it can happen, yes, but there has to be a voida from below that elicits a higher oir that causes it to switch around.
I got you.
Okay. In any event, it's a possibility. The Kli, which is in a state of, which is more refined and more ruchni, It has more oil coming into it. Yeah, it has more oil coming into it because a kli that's more refined, just like a person that's more refined, is going to be able to be makabel in yonim that a non-refined person would not be able to makabel. Why not? Because a person who's not refined is not shy to that particular thing. How do you say? And Amaretz chosid. That's what Chazal say. And Amaretz, it's hard for him to be a chosid because it doesn't have that inyan. Like he doesn't understand the dakustik inyan of being a chosid, right? Same thing over here. The lower kalim are not able to chap the inyan of the higher oil. Is Maila, so therefore the kli that is more dakus and more ruchnius, more refined and more spiritual, that bechin is Maila. And the kli which is more of a mitzius, in other words, it's more coarse. Is mute, and the light in it is reduced. Is mata. That would be called mata, the lower oil. The Kli of Chochma is much more refined than the Kli of Bina. Ad kedei kach that the Kli of Chochma in general is called Koach Ma, the Koach of Bittul. Mash Ein Kain, Bina is called Yesh. Chochma ma'ayin timotze, and therefore Chochma has an aspect of ayin in it. Mash Ein Kain, Bina is the inyan of Yesh. Right? So we can see that there's a huge difference between Chochma and Bina. The Kli of Chochma is much more dakus than the Kli of Bina. Not that Bina doesn't have it in Yonim, especially in Yonim, of course it does, but we'll see. Come on, there are Moshel. Scholar says the Inyan, Hare'en Hasichli, Ba, B'Kinas HaBosha Adayin. In Chochma, the Inyan is not yet grasped clearly. It's the way they describe it, or the way I've heard it described is that moment when who was it, Archimedes, Eureka, that Eureka moment, that's Chochma, that flash of Chochma, sudden insight. But he doesn't have it fixed into a system yet. He can't explain it to anybody else yet because he hasn't figured it out. It's just he chapped in Eureka, right? Now I don't know what Eureka actually means, but it's
I found it.
huh? I found it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so, maybe we shouldn't bring that.
Pardon my Greek.
We shouldn't bring an example from a Greek philosopher, but anyway, whatever. But you get the principle. Oh, yeah, I'm enlightened all of a sudden. I chap the Inyan, right? But I haven't yet explained it even to myself. The Inyan of Chochma, the flash of insight doesn't yet come in Ribu Oisius. It's still mufshat from what? From Hasoga. It's not yet melubash in Hasoga. It's a point of oil that's not yet clothed within a whole intellectual system. Okay. Even though the Nakuda includes basically everything that'll come out of it later on. The way they explain that is just like the drop of sperm includes the whole child within it, right? Essentially, as soon as it fertilizes the egg, obviously, right? As soon as it goes into the kli, because that's the inner order kli, but it's all there. That all, everything that comes out afterwards in the categories of thought, everything comes from that nakuda of Chochma. As he says in Yiddish, es wird als herausgetragen nekudas haskola. It's all brought out of the original point of the haskola. The entire shita, the entire system is brought out of the nakuda. All right. Hare hanakuda koleles kol hapratim. Therefore, we see that the nakuda includes all the pratim. Mikol makom. Hanakuda enam nikarim hapratim klal. In the nakuda itself, you don't see all the details. You only see the nakuda. Okay, we understand that. That that's I think mathematically the inyan of a point as well, is something that doesn't really have dimensions. A point doesn't have dimensions. It only has dimensions when it's attached to another point and another point and another point. Then you can say it has dimensions and so on. It becomes a line and then an area and so on, right? And regarding someone who has chokhmah, he himself sees the inyanim, the pratim that there are in the point. In other words, he can see the inyan, and he can, in his own mind, he can be mafshit. He can be how do you call it? He can spread it out in his own mind and explain and see all the subdivisions within that single point. They say that that's what the difference between like a Rebbe and a Talmud Chochem is, right? The Talmud Chochem understands all the shittas, all the inyonim, whatever it is, but he can't look at the Nakuda and get the whole picture. Yeah, that's the difference between a Rebbe, someone with Ruach HaKodesh. You can see the Nakuda, and in the Nakuda has everything, right? He also understands all the pratim as well, but he sees it as a Nakuda. Mashayin Kain Talmud Chochem doesn't see it as a Nakuda, he only sees the pratim. Okay, in any event. At the time that he has that eureka moment, he sees, he's able to see the pratim therein. Nevertheless, it's still in a state of helem and makif, even for himself, because he has to like put it down on paper and work it out and explain the whole system and so on and so forth. Okay. Even for himself is in a state of helem. Umakif, and the state of makif. It's not or pnimi, it's or makif. As regards the entire haskola that will come out of it afterwards. Mashbi is galus hurakan kudas hasichli levad, and what's revealed is only this point of seichel.
In chokhmah.
Yeah, as chokhmah. Yeah. V'zeu vaday she'ein sham klal ribu oisias b'metzias gamlo hariboy. You don't have the oisius yet to be able to explain it, and you don't have the inyonim which are going to explain it either. Inyonim already analytical. That's already an inyan of bina. The hasoga is bina. The nakuda is chokhmah. Who inyan dakus akli chulu, and that's called dakus akli, and that's inyan of chokhmah as opposed to bina. V'alken meirasha asham ha'inyan sichli beyoser bebechinas hadakus v'ha'ilu. And that's where the refined inyan is. Now, let me ask you something, ladies and gentlemen. Where does this paragraph? It's a very long paragraph, so should probably. When we get to the Chen Hamidah, it's where now we still got a long way to go. I think. So should we leave it here? Let me just see. No, let's go a little bit further just to finish this line. So the Sadakus va'iluchulo kasher bali de hasoga, and when it comes to hasoga, in other words, in bina shenitfas baharbe oisius, there's many letters and so on and so forth. Binyonim rabim, and many inyonim shekulam haim b'chinas tfisa b'hasoga, that they're all in a state of being grasped and understood and so on. Then mismayeta or harbe, in order to be able to get into the categories of bina, the original chayus of the or, the original eureka moment is gone, right? You see that when a person gets that like sudden flash of insight, and then he starts like figuring things out or whatever it is, then he has to really put effort into it. But
to get back.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it can happen that he loses sight of the original Nakuda, right, because it's rofeb, it's like, no, it's not solid yet. Therefore, it often happens, people say that when a person has an insight, write it down immediately, right? And spell it out for yourself, like bring it out a little bit. Don't just leave it in sort of Rosh Hashanah, it's got to be worked out. Okay.
Recently came across the idea that big picture thinking is in the right brain versus IQ and all the very specific intellectual faculties in the left brain.
Yeah.
And
That's Chochmah and Bina, right?
So, and that supports this idea that even though that they're related, but they might be actually be very different.
Different origins.
Or
Yeah,
different
right,
origins.
right. Excellent. That's an excellent point. In fact, that's what I say. The inyan of Chochmah is Re'iyah, Masha Enken Bina is Shmiya.
Right.
Shmiya meaning understanding, rather Shema Yisrael, understand Bina Yisrael, not just here, but understand. So the Chochmah is you see the whole thing. It's Re'iyah, right? You see the whole picture. Masha Enken Bina, it's step by step, piece by piece.
And this is something that I've noticed over the years. Software developers are usually very IQ type of people, but very few of them have big picture abilities for some reason.
Yeah, it's that type of brain.
It's a
an
different,
analytical brain
right.
rather than an innovative brain.
Yeah,
Because they use Dibur, they use Bina.
Bina, right.
Right.
No, so it includes IQ and computational smartness and all that.
Yeah.
Ramesh, I wanted to ask you, I mean, I'm sorry,
Let me just
Sorry, yeah.
let me just finish the recording here if that's okay, and then we'll talk. Is it about this?
I was going to ask you,
Oh,
why
yeah.
did he cite the example of Talmud Choch? I'm not sure how relevant it is to to all of that. I understand that he meant to say from one Nakuda he can say the practice. Is that so? That is the relevance to the whole discussion.
Yeah,
From one-
right.
okay.
Yeah, but he doesn't see necessarily. He doesn't see the nakuda, the essential nakuda, but he sees the pratim, the Talmud Chacham. You understand that? He learned the pratim, right? But someone like a Rebbe, who's a novi or whatever, he sees the nakuda. Just like he was saying now, someone who sees the big picture thing, the whole big picture. The Talmud Chacham doesn't necessarily see it like that. He understands the pratim, the pirta pratim. If he's, on a higher madrega, yeah, maybe then he would be able to see the nakuda also, but.
Which, as a side point, it's interesting that Rebbe Rashab had a role, right? Rav Landa, who was playing a role of Rov in his kind of immediate circle,
Yeah.
which is kind of strange, right? You think Rebbe needs a Rov, but
Really?
that's how they operated like that. Right?
Yeah. I actually knew Rav Landa. I met him. Rav Landa was the Rabbi B'nai Brak,
Right.
Moshe Landa. But
That's
Oh,
the
it's
son.
Zalman's-
That's the son.
yeah.
Zalman's father.
I knew the father.
Ah,
I met the father a few times. It was close to the Rebbe Rashab. He was actually very young when he was the president of the Rebbe Rashab in his 20s.
wow.
Talmud Chacham, Muhak. It was like he knew everything. Just amazing.
But just the concept, right? The Rebbe has another
A
person
rabbi, right?
who's not a Rebbe, right? And he is dealing with Shilas.
Yep. All right, Rabbi Sign, Virtai. I think we'll end here, and I hope it works out.
Where's the end today?
We ended on Daf Ayin Aleph, the third line.
I have the old print here.
Мне повезло, что я пришел на Маре, слушай.
It depends on if you're learning the same. It's on Daf Nun Daled if you're in that version.
Dalit.
Yeah, Nun Daled.
You're in Nun
Daled. About 15 lines into the chapter.
Я тебе скажу, я ничего
So
не
you just
понимаю.
started this mimer today? You finished the
Ну,
previous
слушай.
mimer today also?
No, we finished the previous
Я
one.
не видел, это совершенно не то же самое, что на Zoom.